Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is Wednesday, January the 17th, 2018. TowerGate number 314. Thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, it is Wednesday, and of course that means it's take out the trash and eat chicken. Every Wednesday, I take out the trash and I eat chicken. Let's get to the news of the day. Let's see here. Sara Carter of Circa News. She is reporting that Confusion GPS is still investigating Trump. Question is, who's paying them? Well, you know, I'm not the least bit surprised that the investigation, so-called investigation into Trump, Russia, whatever, is still continuing. It's continuing through Uncle Bob, the executioner Mueller, and his Hillary donor posse. But I wouldn't be surprised if, as arrogant as Glenn Simpson is, and his buddies, that and possibly Christopher Steele, that they're making a last ditch to find anything they can. You know, it seems like they would just go to these. The answer is simple for them: go to your original sources, let them come forward in public, let them testify under oath in a public hearing in front of Congress, and tell their story. There you go. But they won't do that. You can bet on that. But if I had to take a guess, and again, this is likely true, wouldn't surprise me. And if you want to know who's funding it, well, probably the same people that were always funding it. Probably the rotten Reverend Clinton. She's probably doubled down. That's all these people know how to do. Probably getting some help from her good friend George Soros. Probably getting some help from some Never Trump Republicans. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised that Fusion GPS is still somehow, digging away at trying to find something along with Christopher Steele. I mean, their necks are on the line. Their necks are on the line. And again, as I've said more times than I can count, they have no real fallback position, really. There is another narrative floating around out there that they're starting to float. But as far as the position of the main actors who've already testified in civil cases in the UK and in Florida in the BuzzFeed suit, and have been under oath testimony in closed sessions in Congress, I mean, these guys are already on record, the two main players, Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson. And their position is that they believe that the information in the dossier is good. Yet they both admit, or at least what Glenn Simpson admits in his own testimony, he believes the information is good, but he never did verify it. He's saying he believes it's good because he trusts Christopher Steele and his credentials. Christopher Steele, of course, is falling back on the fact that he got this information through sources via intermediaries, and he trusts them, despite the fact that he's never actually talked to the source witnesses themselves. So this is the only thing that they can do. If either Glenn Simpson or Ben Smith at BuzzFeed or Christopher Steele, if any of these guys come out and flip and say, well, yeah, it probably wasn't true, we just kind of threw it together, we didn't really know about our sources, and it's probably not true, we're busted. They can't do that. I mean, they all might as well just, turn over their bank accounts to the people who are suing them, which is a lot of people. They're being sued by the 3 billionaire oligarchs from Alpha Bank. They won't run out of money anytime soon. They're being sued by Carter Page. They're being sued by Mr. Cohen, Trump's attorney. And of course they're being sued by Mr. Gubarev, who also is a billionaire. These guys have a lot more money than they do. They will run out of, Simpson and Christopher Steele will run out of money to pay their lawyers long before Mr. Gubarev and the 3 oligarchs. I can assure you of that. But yeah, there is another narrative they're floating, just in case, for when the bomb actually does drop on them. And they've been floating it now for about a week, and that is to say that, well, Fusion and Christopher Steele and the FBI and the DOJ and the CIA and everyone involved, they were all duped. They all believed in the dossier. They all believed in this other intelligence that they were getting. They were all duped by the Russians. They really believed it was all true. And they were duped. They were fooled. The FBI, the DOJ, the CIA, the whole group of them, the Rotten Reverend Clinton, the media, they would all have to admit Christopher Steele, this super spy with all this credibility, Glenn Simpson of Confusion GPS, and the stellar work that they do, they will all have to admit that they were duped by those tricky Russians. They can try to sell that, but really, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. What's going to matter is when this thing actually goes into the legal system, and it actually finds its way into a situation where there's a jury, a grand jury convened, a prosecutor, and they have to testify under oath and produce witnesses, documents, records, and things and such. It's all going to come down to the facts. That's what happens in a court. You know, hearsay evidence is not admissible in a court of law. And so far, all the evidence is hearsay evidence. You cannot go into court and say, like Christopher Steele cannot go into court and say, yeah, I got this information from an intermediary who talked to the actual source. Right there, at that point, none of that can be entered in as evidence because that would be hearsay evidence, not admissible in court. You have got to have first-hand testimony. You would have to have Christopher Steele say, yes, I personally spoke to the actual sources, and here is what they said. And then they would call those actual sources, and they would, question them. And then, of course, they would be cross-examined. And then there would be documents, witnesses, and other forms of evidence that could corroborate any of it. So it's all going to come down to the legal matter. And the propaganda and all the spin is not going to matter once we make it to that point. But we're still going to have to put up with this stuff for quite a while because it's going to take a while to get there. There's a lot to unravel. But yeah, that's interesting. Confusion GPS, still trying to confuse us and still looking for Russia collusion. My. What's next? Oh yes, I like this story, and I think you will too. Florida Representative Ron DeSantis, that's a very good man, and based on the Florida district he lives in, I can only assume that those folks in that Florida district are some pretty good folks too. We love you guys for electing such a good man to Congress. Pat yourselves on the back. So Ron DeSantis, who is the chairman of the National Security Committee, sent a letter last week to Paul Ryan, Eddie Munster Big Ears Ryan, asking him to direct Chairman Nunes of the House Intelligence Committee to declassify documents given to the committee related to the dossier, and this would include the FISA application. DeSantis wants Paul Ryan to give permission to Devin Nunes to declassify this intel. President Trump can declassify it too, but generally a president will not do that and get involved. It's considered not good political etiquette. But certainly Ryan and Nunes could get together and declassify this and release all the documents relating to the dossier as well as the FISA application. They certainly can do that. And I don't know if that's partially a slap back at Diane, Turning Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein, and kind of a slap back on her, or whether it's just something that they genuinely feel is the right thing to do. And I think it's probably a little bit of both. Certainly they like a little payback for Senator Diane, Turning Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein, but they would also probably really want the American people and believe that the American people have a right to see the truth and to see the documents and the evidence and everything else regarding the dossier. There's a lot to see, and there's a lot still more to come. My guess is that Nunes will not do it now. I believe that he will do it at some point, but probably not until we get to the end of the investigation. But the fact is, as we move down this road, eventually it's all going to come out anyway. So I don't think that they'll do this now because they're in the process of an investigation and that type of thing. But I do think that we will reach a point somewhere down this road where they will release just about everything. And but by then, most everything will already be out. The only thing we'll get then is just little details. The bigger story will already be out there, and that will happen probably during the period when they appoint a grand jury and stuff like that. So that's when we'll start learning about all this stuff that we don't already know, and we already know a lot. Let's face it, we know quite a bit. And I think, honestly, that we have a much better chance of the case in Florida and the case in the UK against Guberev versus Steele. Christopher Steele, the British government has definitely got his back because they are working probably against Mr. Guberev's attorneys, making it very tough in that particular lawsuit. But in the lawsuit in Florida against BuzzFeed, where Christopher Steele is also a key player, as well as Glenn Simpson, the judge down there is moving things along much more rapidly and has been leaning more towards Mr. Guberev's attorneys in most of the rulings. And I believe that the case against BuzzFeed down in Florida will likely reveal probably just about everything about the dossier long before the Congress gets around to it. That case will finish up, probably be done before the real stuff starts happening in Washington. So, yeah, I mean, go ahead and release it, but it's all going to come out anyway. Okay, Congress is now targeting the State Department and their involvement in the dossier. And this has a lot to do with the fact that they've been digging around and finding that Steele was viewed as a valuable source of information inside the Obama administration and in the State Department of the rotten Reverend Clinton. And now they have launched a probe. Yeah, well, maybe they watched my video last week. I don't know. But yeah, we know that Christopher Steele submitted about 100 reports to the rotten Reverend Clinton State Department regarding Ukraine and Russia. And apparently he's done other work for the Obama administration and things and such. So apparently he is regarded pretty highly and was known very well throughout the State Department because the stuff that he would give them would go to Samantha Power and Susan Rice, and they would use his stuff at the UN. So they are very well read on Christopher Steele. They know very well who he is, probably have met with him personally, probably know him personally. He has connections to the rotten Reverend Clinton. He has connections to the Obama administration and all the power players at the UN from the Obama administration. And, of course, Samantha Power will be back to testify, as will Susan Rice, in the weeks to come. And I assume that they'll be digging more into that. And, yeah, so we're learning that the State Department definitely had more connections to Christopher Steele and had some sort of a relationship with him. And because Samantha Power and Susan Rice both did unmasking and things related to Trump-Russia, they're probably just following the bouncing ball and saying, wait a minute, Christopher Steele was very well known and well respected in the Obama administration and in the State Department. He did all this work for the State Department on the side that was used by Samantha Power and Susan Rice. They were quoting his work at the UN. They did unmasking based on the dossier that he's alleged to have created. So yeah, you can see where there's connections there, and now they're going to dig into the State Department and find out just another agency to go along with the FBI, the DOJ, the NSD division of the DOJ, and now they're getting into the State Department. Now, when you get into the State Department, that puts you much, much closer to the White House, because the State Department really is a direct arm of the administration, whereas the FBI and the DOJ are supposed to be independent agencies outside the administration. But the State Department actually carries out the president's foreign policy objectives, and they're more part of the administration. They don't, unlike the FBI and the DOJ, which are supposed to be independent and non-political and this and that and the other thing, the State Department is exactly the opposite. They are a direct component of the administration. They are on the political agenda of the president and his administration, and they are all part of that. So, you're talking about a group now that is a biased group, and all of them are. I'm not just saying that about the Obama administration. I mean, if you're the State Department, you're working to implement the president's agenda, just like Donald Trump has his own State Department. He has Rex Tillerson and all his people, and what's her name at the UN, Nikki Haley, and they are essentially giving the president's take on things, or trying to present his message or his view of the situation and the administration and others around him. So, yeah, looking into the State Department takes you directly into the administration of the president, as opposed to just the DOJ or FBI, where you're talking about supposedly independent law enforcement organizations or agencies of the overall federal government. Big difference. So the fact that they're digging into the State Department, and of course we know there's a lot of bones buried there, don't we? Yes, we do. We know that's where a lot of those Clinton emails got hung up, and Tom Fitton is going to be getting them before September 2018, where we might learn a lot more about the way that the Clinton Foundation and the pay-for-play actually was managed by Huma. That will be quite revealing, but by that time we'll be so deep and thick into all this other stuff, my God, I don't know how we'll handle it all. There's so many scandals that it's hard to, you almost have to just work one scandal, That's why I stay focused on TowerGate, the surveillance, the unmasking, the coup, the dossier, and those things. And I stay, I work on the Uranium One, and I work on the pay-for-play and stuff like that, but, there's so many scandals that you literally cannot, really cover all of them and do really good on all of them. You kind of got to focus on one or two or three things here. You can't focus on all of it unless that's all you do all day long. Of course, I have other things I do all day long. So, anyway, there's just so many scandals, it's hard to keep up with them all. Nunes will hold a vote on Thursday as to whether or not to release the transcripts of Glenn Simpson's testimony to the House Intel Committee, and it's likely that this will pass. Now, as you know, Senator Turn In Your Guns, Mr. and Mrs. America Feinstein released the Senate Judiciary testimony from Glenn Simpson because she had a cold. And it appears now that Nunes is being pressured by Republicans around him. It's like, hey, Feinstein released the stuff in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Why don't we release our stuff from the House Intel Committee? Because you're going to get different questions and some different things. But ultimately, what it's going to tell us is the same thing the Senate Judiciary Committee told us, which is that Glenn Simpson did not answer a lot of the questions we wanted answered. He waffled on a lot of questions. He probably outright lied on some questions. And overall, what you get out of his testimony is that he did not verify the dossier. He trusted Christopher Steele. He believes that it's true. And that's really, all you really get out of him. He did admit to talking to journalists and things like that. But, yeah, go ahead and release it. Release everything. I'm all for, get it out there. It's all going to come out anyway. It's all going to come out anyway. But anyhow, Thursday, they're going to hold a vote. It will likely pass. And then so that they'll go ahead and release the transcripts of the House Intelligence Committee hearings with Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. So we'll be watching that. Excuse me. Now, also, what was supposed to happen on Thursday, which we were all kind of looking forward to, was the testimony of Bruce Orr. And by the way, Nellie Orr has also been asked to come and testify. Both, the Orrs. Not together, separately. But Bruce Orr was supposed to be here Thursday, tomorrow. But apparently Nunes has pulled that back, and they're rescheduling that for sometime early in February. Now, the reason he did that is because they're right now in the process of voting to reauthorize the FISA 702 Surveillance Act. And of course, there's a lot of people with everything that's going on that did not want that to happen. They held the vote open for cloture for an hour and a half to finally get the 60 votes for cloture. What that means is that once you put something like that up, you can have pretty much unlimited debate. But at any time, the committee leader can call for a cloture vote, which means if they can get 60 votes, they can shut down any more debate. They can have a vote, say, okay, we got 60 votes for cloture. That means, okay, the debate is over, no more discussion, no more debate. We can now move this forward to the full House for a vote. So they tried to get cloture, and they got 58 votes, but they finally were able to twist a couple arms and get the 60 votes after an hour and a half of it being open on the floor. And I believe the last two votes came from Claire McCaskill. They turned her for the 59th vote, and then they got a congressman from Louisiana. I can't remember his name, but they got him to turn, and they got him for the 60th vote. And that brought about cloture, which closed any further debate. So now it will go to the full House. And unfortunately, it will probably pass. But the reason that it will probably pass, now just on its face, the way it is, it probably would not pass. But what Devin Nunes has done, and you have to kind of understand Nunes' thinking here. He does sit on the House Intelligence Committee. He's aware of a lot of intelligence. And he does believe in the FISA 702. He does believe in it. He thinks it's a good thing. He thinks it's a tool that the intelligence community and law enforcement need to fight terrorism and crime and such things. But what he did was, he's obviously looking at all the violations of FISA 702. And so what his position, it appears to be, is that Nunes is basically saying, yeah, we need to reauthorize FISA 702. We're going to continue to investigate how it was abused by the previous administration, but that was the administration that was at fault, not the FISA 702 itself. It was used improperly by them, and we're continuing the investigation, and when we find the wrongdoing, we're going to hold those people accountable. That's his position there. But he's also apparently added some things that he's going to be requiring of the, I guess, FISA Act, additions to or amendments to the FISA Act to try to lock down the restrictions on it and the, I guess, the safeguards. He wants to add some things to the FISA bill, the 702 bill, that will hopefully prevent these types of abuses from happening in the future. So his position is, okay, yeah, 702 was violated. We're investigating that, but I think it's important. I think we should pass it. And in addition to that, here's some things I'm going to require that must happen in order for us to get passage of it. You know, it must be agreed that these actions will be taken to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. So that's pretty much the all-around position where Nunes is. And so now the 702 FISA will go to a full vote. I expect it will pass, whether you like it or not. I am not happy about that. We do know that Rand Paul is going to filibuster it. You know, he's a civil libertarian. He's hardcore on civil liberties. We know that Rand Paul would abolish the FISA Act altogether, and probably the CIA and the NSA along with it, if he had his way. You know, so anyway, you can expect the Rand Paul filibuster, and it probably will not succeed, but he will get some points across, I'm sure. They'll probably pass the FISA Act probably at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night when no one's looking. That's how that will be done, because I know it's not very popular. But they're going to assure us that they've put in some extra measures to make sure it's not abused again. We'll see. Do you believe them? Go back and watch the church committee hearings. Go back and watch the church. Google Frank Church. Google Frank Church. Read all about it for yourself. Wiki it. See if they'll ever do that stuff again. Hey, today, Donald Trump threw Jim Acosta out of the White House. Threw him out of the White House. You know, I would have revoked this guy's press credentials a long time ago and I would have thrown him and his entire network out of the White House. I wouldn't even let CNN anywhere near the White House or any press briefing. And of course, Trump got the results of his medical exam today, 100%, including getting 30 out of 30, a perfect score on the mental part of it. So it looks like he is as healthy as he can be, and the doctor said he has great genes. Yes, he does. Well, the Democratic National Committee is in tatters. We are learning now that there are some serious problems going on within the inner workings at the DNC. As you know, they made Tom Perez the head of the DNC, and they brought in Keith Ellerson to be his number 2 man, mainly to try to bring in the Bernie bros. Apparently that is not working. What actually wasn't that they wanted to bring in the Bernie bros. What they wanted was Bernie's mailing list. They wanted Bernie's mailing list, and they thought that Bernie was stupid enough. He's pretty stupid, but he's not that stupid. They were hoping that if they brought in Keith Ellison, that they would sucker Bernie in, and he'd think, oh, I guess the Democrats love me now. They really want me to be a fan. Hey, they won't even want to talk to all my donors, so all my donors can become their donors. No, it's not going to happen. Bernie is not going to turn over his donor list. No way. And if he did, he'd make them pay a lot of money for it, because he paid for it. And his donors will be awfully pissed if they had their names turned over to the DNC. And they know it. But that was the whole point of putting Ellison in there. But apparently Ellison and Perez are having a lot of problems, because Ellison is trying to bring in more of the rhetoric, you can say, I guess the rhetoric of the Bernie Sanders supporters, and he's trying to bring the more far left wing of the Democratic Party into the process. And of course, Tom Perez can't do this because he was put in there by the corporate Democrats, the corporate big money Democrats. And the number one issue that the Bernie bros have with the corporate Democratic Party is the Wall Street backing, the big money from Wall Street. And the Democratic Party, corporate Democratic Party, cannot envision any situation where they cut ties with their big Democratic corporate donors, especially on Wall Street. So it's, you're asking for two people to get together that just cannot get together. There's no way that works. It doesn't work unless the Bernie bros are dupes. And some of them are, but most of them aren't. They're true believers, man. These are hardcore socialists. They are true believers, and they despise Wall Street. And so it doesn't look good. In addition to that, there's a lot of pressure because the Democrats just cannot raise money. They've got so many problems. Now they have all these scandals brewing, and as these scandals unfold, that will reflect negatively. They're going through these issues now on the budget and DACA, which we'll get to in just a moment. There's a lot of tension and things going on in the Democratic Party, which are not good. And I know hear a lot of people say, oh, they're going to pick up seats. They may take the House and blah, 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 blah. I don't think they'll take the House. I think the Republicans will pick up 3 to 4 seats in the Senate. I think they'll hold on to the House. They may lose a seat here or there. It's kind of tough to hold on to the House in a midterm. But then again, they could pick up seats. Who knows? The Democrats are a disaster. They're a smoking pile of disaster. Homeland Security has asked the Department of Justice to see if they can arrest the leaders of sanctuary cities. Well, we saw the testimony today of the, I forget who she's for, I guess Homeland Security, head of Homeland Security, basically telling Democrats on that panel that they're right now looking into whether or not they can start arresting leaders in these sanctuary cities. And I think that they probably could. I mean, the law is the law, and they're breaking it. That would be very interesting to see, wouldn't it? To see mayors and government people in these sanctuary cities being arrested and charged. Let's have it. I mean, if they want to have the fight, let's go ahead and have the fight. We'll see how far they'll go. Will they arrest the political leaders in these sanctuary cities? That would be entertainment. That's a couple buckets of popcorn and a 64-gallon, keg of beer or something. I don't know. You're going to need a lot of beer and popcorn or soda and popcorn, or pop and popcorn, or whatever it is that you do. Water, tea. I'm doing tea right now. Extra sweet lemon tea. Mighty tasty. May need a couple buckets of popcorn when they start arresting mayors and folks and governors from sanctuary cities. Jerry Brown arrested. That would be funny to see. Moonbeam. Mueller has subpoenaed Steve Bannon. Well, you know, they're probably, of course, I guess they probably heard that this Bannon did testify in closed session today, and apparently he was very belligerent, very hard-headed, very bullish. He's Steve Bannon, and he did what Steve Bannon does, and apparently he still supports the agenda of the president. I know him and Trump have had a falling out, but he's still hardcore for the agenda. And I guess Mueller thinks that because there's this rift between him and Trump, because Trump calls him Sloppy Steve, and they had a falling out, that he may believe that Steve Bannon will try to get back at Trump by dropping all sorts of negative stuff on him or something like that. But that's not going to work for one simple reason. Well, it is true that Steve Bannon, Sloppy Steve, and Trump have had a falling out. They may not like each other a whole lot right now, but at one time they were pretty close, and they'll probably patch things up at some point. I don't know. But the thing about this is that what may have caused a rift between them is that maybe Bannon thinks that Trump's compromising. And Bannon is a no-compromise person. He doesn't do compromise. It's my way or the highway. And that's a good position to be in if you're a writer or whatever, but it's not a good position to be in if you're a White House advisor. That's why he had to go. I mean, it is called governing. You do have to govern. You do have to, politic. You do have to, negotiate and compromise and things and such, which Trump's been doing all his life as a businessman. Steve Bannon is not really in that position. But the thing about it is that despite their personal issues that they may have right now, I can assure you that Steve Bannon despises Mueller and the left far more than he despises Trump. And I don't even think he despises Trump. I think he probably knows he made a big mistake. And he probably feels bad about it. And that type of thing. But Steve Bannon, understands that Trump right now is as close as he's ever going to get to an agenda that Bannon would support. And he's not going to go in there and dump on Trump to try to take Trump down, even if he had anything, which I don't think he does. Because, again, Bannon despises Mueller and what he's all about and what the left is all about far more than he dislikes Trump. And regardless of how you feel about Bannon, whatever, I think the guy's a patriot at heart. I just think he's not, he's not ready for prime time. Let's put it that way. But I think he's a good man at heart, and but he's a true believer, and he's not a political guy. Let's put it that way. He's not a guy that was meant to be in politics. He should have been a writer, a journalist, or an opinion maker, or a speech giver, or what have you, writing books or whatever. But he's made some mistakes. I think he knows it. But no, he's not going to turn on Trump. He despises Mueller and the left, big time. Japan set off their missile warning system, and of course they had to quickly, much quicker than they did in Hawaii, come out and say, "Oh, sorry, it was just a mistake. There was no missiles coming our way." You got to wonder about that. A lot of people suggesting it may not have been a false alarm. How about that? Missiles didn't actually hit anything or land anywhere, but a lot of times you don't actually have to launch the missile. You can activate something that may trigger your opponent, their early warning systems, to see how they react. And I have some personal experience with that, and I can tell you that there's things you can do without actually launching a missile which will trigger an alert. Trust me. Let's see, well, we're running out of time. Yes, we are running out of time. I will have to get to this tomorrow night because I won't be able to cover this in the time I have left. Okay. Well, there you go. That is TowerGate for today, January the 17th, 2018. day 314. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tomorrow, I'm going to start out with what I couldn't get to tonight because I think it's important. And I'm going to go through and break down how the strategy is being used in concert with each other between the various groups in the investigations on the dossier, the surveillance, and all these other things, so that you can kind of get a clearer picture as to how these things are all coming together and why they're being done kind of in unison, and why it's going to be so powerful when they do drop the bomb.